I'm gonna just go off and introduce myself. Like, who am I within this games industry thing? So first off, I can start off by bragging that I have absolutely no game-relevant school or education, but I try to make up for that by having about 10 years of hobby development experience. I'm currently busy with my startup baby, which is Megafuzz, a small independent game studio based in Denmark. And this is our first real game. Like, I have a lot of experience with making games. I have little experience shipping them, and I have absolutely zero experience shipping commercial games. So this is going to be from my very limited experience with commercial release. And I'm also going to be talking about Spoiler Alert, which is our game. So what is Spoiler Alert? Well, it's best described as Super Mario in reverse. Classic platformer formula with picking up coins, jumping on enemies, avoiding spikes, fireball power-ups, all that. So when you start, the game is already beaten, so you have to unbeat the game. So you go left instead of right, and basically undo everything that has been done. So a little bit history about the game. It was born at a game jam in Denmark. The idea was brought on by the theme of the game jam, which was resistance. Now, a lot of people at the game jam were thinking like friction, rebel games, very literal interpretations of the theme. But for some reason, I was thinking like resistance against mainstream in video gaming. And the most mainstream video game concept I could think of was that you always have to complete a game. So what would happen if you uncompleted a game? And from there, the platformer formula was a natural choice for me, having a profound love of classic platformer games. And it's a very tried and true genre, so there's a lot of cliché elements that you can, try to present from a fresh perspective. The game did pretty well at the game jam. So afterwards, my partner and I decided to make it into a fully fledged game. So about 6 months later into that, we realized that this was, it looked like it was going somewhere, and our intentions were growing more serious. So, Megafuzz, our company, was born, and we were headed in a more serious direction. So to take away from this is that, beware of game jams, because games can occur, but also not only our game was born at a game jam, but also our company was. So I guess, game jams are awesome. If you haven't attended anyone, then you definitely should. So making a game backwards have some very unique design challenges. For instance, did I mention it was our first game? That's always challenging. But there's a lot of unique challenges that you don't get in many types of other games than this. For instance, I accidentally made a boss act normal. Now this may sound weird, but going from left to right is so ingrained in our brains that just wrapping your mind properly around designing a game backwards can actually be more challenging than you think. At least it was to me. So this example, I designed an entire boss fight. It was shooting fireballs at you. You could kill it off and all stuff like that. It wasn't until I designed I'd made the boss fight done that I realized I'd made it act as a normal boss. So it was alive when you reached it. It was fighting. It was shooting fireballs at you and stuff like that. So I had to redo the entire boss fight, making it swallow its own fireballs, making it go back to life and stuff like that. So just wrapping your mind properly around thinking backwards was it caught us a few times. So until we were actually in that mindset. Also, how do we tackle a simple element such as falling spikes, the ones that you have to run past in platformers? Because in a game like that, they're a threat, but going backwards, you're just going to fall back up into place. So how do we make them a threat? The first thing we tried was making them so that some spikes had fallen further down than others. So some of them you had to jump over, and some of them you had to run past. But it worked in theory. But in practice, we couldn't really communicate properly to the player which ones they had to jump over and which ones they had to run past. So what we ended up doing was mixing them in, because they were already on the ground and they had fallen down. So we mixed them in with regular upwards going spikes. So the challenge actually became having to be observant of your your environment to determine which ones you had to jump over. And it ended up working, but it was kind of tricky to realize how we could make that work. And it was a simple element that we'd seen a million times before, but going backwards, it was kind of different. One of our biggest challenges at all was, how do you explain to the player what the hell is going on? Because in the early version of the game just started with showing off the credits and then throwing you backwards into a fully fledged boss fight, which was the final boss of the game. It made sense, but he was running around shooting stuff at you, and no one even knew what was going on at the time because the game seemed broken. It was running backwards, and there was this huge boss fight, and everything was very weird. How do we communicate that? So what we ended up doing instead was, actually having the first minute of the game play as a normal game. So you're running forwards like you've seen a million times before. You get to kill the boss yourself, you get to rescue the princess, and you get to see a little snippet of the credits. And then everything starts to go backwards, because that way the player sees that everything he's just done is being undone. So he gets that connection, and that helped a lot. But it took us a while to get there and figure out, how to solve that problem. And also, some people actually thought the game was broken at that point. It got so bad that we got one bug report of a player playing the beta saying, oh, I actually like the game, but I think there's a very serious bug because the game is going backwards, and I'm at the last level instead of the first. I think it's really broken, but it seemed good. So, and that was really a problem. It was a difficulty communicating what was going on. Also, we faced some very unique design questions, like, does the game get easier or harder? Because the logic thing would be to make it become easier as you go. But it wouldn't really make for a compelling gameplay experience. And also, explaining the game going backwards while throwing a very difficult level at the player would not really work. So in some key areas, we just had to deviate a little bit from the concept in order to make for a compelling gameplay experience. So I guess for us to take away from this is that gameplay is king at the end of the day. I mean, the concept may be cool, but you also have to think about if it interferes with the experience. Also, something as simple as achievements. I mean, do you start with all achievements and lock them as you go? It would be fun, and we actually wanted to do that. But then we stopped to think about, what do we do if we go on Steam, which the game is on Steam, and what do we do on Google Game Center, iOS Game Center and Google Game Services and stuff like that, because they don't allow unorthodox stuff like that. They wouldn't really allow having locked achievement or unlocked achievements and then locking them. It wouldn't work. So again, we had to deviate a bit from the concept, and this is not something that you generally face in designing a regular game. So but there were rewarding aspects as well. I mean, having unique challenges, I think, also gives you some rewarding experience. For instance, having the opportunity to use habits of years of gameplay against players is awesome. I mean, seeing them for the first time when they want to collect the coins, right? Because it's ingrained in them. So when they get a time paradox because the game punishes them for it, they get frustrated, but at the same time they understand it was their own fault, and they realize it's because of all their habits, and they're like, oh, I'm frustrated, but at the same time I get it, and it's cool. That was very rewarding for us to see. Also, to see their excitement the first time they see something they've seen a million times before, such as a fireball power-up, but instead of shooting a fireball, they're actually swallowing it and unshooting it. And to see that mix, like, 1 second they're like, what the hell is going on? But then they're like, oh, I get it, this is awesome. Because it's a familiar thing, but they suddenly, see it from a fresh perspective. And then we have a unique chance as well to catch players off guard in terms of story, because the game is called spoiler alert, because the first thing you see is the ending. So no one is really expecting anything. They're like, oh, I know what's going on, I know the ending. But then we have a unique challenge, a unique opportunity to throw in a plot twist at the beginning of the game, which no one really expects. But I'm not going to spoil anything. So what have we learned from all this? Well, Mr. Death Bunny, the final boss, taught us that sometimes less is more. Like I mentioned previously, he was, earlier on, he was a fully fledged boss that was shooting stuff at you and stuff like that. And it was cool, but it didn't work at all. It was way too difficult, and there was no way to communicate it properly. So what we ended up doing was, you entered the boss fight, he gave his speech, it was very dramatic, but then instead of going into a real boss fight, you actually just jumped on him once and he died. And, it wasn't really something we were really satisfied with because it was way too simple, but we thought, there has to be a boss, so this is, I guess, the only way we can do it. So we tried to ship that out to a few testers, but what we actually experienced was that, not only was it way simpler for the player, it also made them laugh, which was something that, the first scene didn't accomplish, because it had this dramatic final boss build-up with the speech and all, and then it goes right on to that anticlimactic, poof, and he just dies. So not only did it make it simpler for the player and for us, I mean, imagine having to do a fully fledged boss fight at the beginning of the game, tweaking the difficulty level while explaining that everything is backwards, versus just having to do a very, short, gimmicky cutscene that actually makes people laugh. What's easiest for the developer? And it was also, way better for the players. So I guess sometimes, if you're facing a tough design challenge, maybe you're overthinking. I'm not saying that this applies to everything, but in our case, it certainly did. So maybe, the solution is simpler than you think. And also, if you have a tried and true element in your game, great, well, try to flip it. Our game is basically one big flipped game mechanic and, rip-off of Super Mario, but it kind of works. So maybe you have something in your game that you can turn around, something very, common, very regular, but you can present it from a different perspective. For instance, in Spoiler Alert, we could have made you pick up coins, but we made you not pick up coins. Could have made you shoot fireballs, but we made you unshoot fireballs. And, like any sane developer, we could have made you avoid spike pitfalls of certain death, but, making you jump directly into your own death was way more fun, so that's what we did. So, for instance, in your game, whatever you're making, maybe you could, instead of playing the tough hero, you could play all the disposable bad guys. Instead of starting with no items to go out and find them all, maybe you can start with all items and for some reason go out to dispose of them all. And maybe the world is always, it's in peril, go out and save it. Maybe the world is saved, so you should go out and make it in peril. Small twists like that is always fun to play with. That's exactly what we experienced. And not only to this backwards going game, but in general, it's good to try and put some fresh perspective on things. So if you can do that, definitely try it. And then I guess on a more serious note, one last thing we learned that I really want to take to you guys is that, a weird concept such as this has plenty of design challenges already. So, unless this is your first game or you really just, want to punish yourself, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is don't try this at home. Thank you. So I guess we have about 5 minutes for questions, I guess, if anyone has anyone. Yeah?
How did you handle the player progression when you're going backwards? Did you start with all your abilities and take them away?
Well, no, the power-ups actually work kind of like in Super Mario. In Super Mario, you finally got that fireball power-up, then 10 seconds later you fall into spikes and die, you lose it. So in this game, that's what happened. You've already gotten all the power-ups. So at some point, you're going to approach a dead body of yourself in the past, laying in some spikes. But he had the fireball power up. So when you jump into your own death and actually revive yourself, you get the power up that you lost when you died. So, and now you're unshooting your fireballs and stuff like that. And then at some point, when you originally would have acquired the power-up, you actually lose it because you're putting it back into place. So it's kind of like putting the mushroom back into the block.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes. Yeah?
You mentioned you were a hobbyist. What were you doing before, and are you now doing this full-time?
What I did before was, I was studying, going to school, and doing some freelance jobs. I'm still doing that, to make a living, because this is still not a full-time gig for us, but we're trying to do that. But I was definitely doing this, every spare time I had, all the spare time I had, I put into, making hobby games, which was also what gave me the experience to kind of make this game and make it work. But as for our company, we're basically doing this in our spare time and trying to build up, a steady platform for us to, to make a living off it, hopefully someday. Right now the game is out on Steam and going out on a lot of other platforms pretty soon as well, and we have other upcoming games. But being in this very saturated indie market can be tough, so I think it's going to take a while for us to make a living off it, but hopefully someday that at least that's our goal right now. So yes. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you for watching, and come see me if you want some codes or something.